Hello. I have been working on a bunch of projects recently, and in this video, I am going to share one of these projects that you can actually enjoy right now. And that is, at the time of recording this video, I've just recently launched SK8CAD.com. SK8CAD is skateboard design software that you might have seen on the Open Source Boards website that allows you to create custom skateboard and longboard shapes and molds directly in your browser. SK8CAD.com is kind of a revamped version of this tool, and that's not what this video is fully really going to be about though. This is going to be about what that can do. So let me rephrase that, or give you some background. SK8CAD was primarily for one-part molds and boards previously, and a while back I kind of quietly launched SK8CAD for two-part molds. And I did it kind of quietly because I wasn't sure if it would work right. Two-part skateboard molds require proper surface offset, meaning that the male mold and the female mold actually don't have identical surfaces. The curvature needs to be appropriately offset to account for the thickness of the material that you are pressing. And this is a little challenging to explain without a picture, and if you click on the user guide at SK8CAD.com, you'll see a little bit of a better explanation than this. But what happens if you don't properly offset your molds is you get uneven pressure and you end up with boards that could have cracks in them because there's too much pressure in certain spots. They're maybe mellower than you intended, or they're delaminating. Anyways, I finally got around to testing this, and it seems to be working pretty well. So that is kind of what inspired or helped me move forward with releasing SK8CAD.com now. And before I get into the thick of the video, I would like to just say that if you do like SK8CAD, if you want to support it, there's an opportunity to do that at the end of the video through Patreon, and I'll explain how to do that later, again, at the end of the video. But for this main video, what it's about is I am going to be recreating one of the first boards that Open Source Skateboards created and designed, and remaking that mold using SK8CAD. The reasons I chose this particular design was, one, it was a well-liked mold, and I got great feedback on it, and it was a symmetrical mold, which of course I personally really like. And the second reason is it was a steeper mold, or steeper than average. It's not overly steep, but I'm going off too much on the steepness. The reason the steepness is important is because that would also showcase and highlight any issues with the offsetting algorithm in the software. So let's dive into it, and first let's take a look at the original mold design. So here is the original board design, and what I'm going to use this for is generating my SK8CAD model, and this is SK8CAD.com. And if you're familiar with SK8CAD, it should look pretty similar, and I'll probably do a more in-depth video on this later. But what I'm going to do is design my molds right now. So I'm just going to show the male mold first, and I'll be honest, I'm doing this after the fact, so I may have done some different numbers here. But anyways, the length of the mold, I think I said, was going to be 34 inches. The width was, I believe I said 9.9. I'm going to be making this mold from vertically laminated Baltic birch, which has a thickness a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch, and this is basically the narrowest I'd want to make it for the size boards I'm going to be creating on it. That doesn't require me to like trim the Baltic birch down to a thinner size. I could just work with the stock thickness. The mold height, I think I was going to make 3.75 or 3.5. Mold offset, I designed this for pressing 3 boards because, again, I wanted to check the offset. What you're going to see is I only press 1 board in the video because I don't have a glue roller and I'm doing this by myself, and I really only feel confident in my ability to glue up 1 board at a time before I'm getting too close to the end of the glue's working time. What I ended up doing is just throwing in some dry veneers to make up the space of the other 2 decks. The mold offset is basically the thickness of each board I'm pressing plus the number of boards I'm pressing at once. So if I'm doing 3 boards that are 7/16 of an inch thick, my offset is 1.3125. And I'm going to include these alignment notches just so I know where my mold center lines and those sorts of things are. And let's set the board design. So the original board width was 8 inches. Let's see if I can do a 2-screen dual action thing going on here. Okay. Next, the wheelbase. Oh, this drawing is missing the wheelbase. Thankfully, I remembered that it's 14 inches. The nose and tail lengths were 6.625. This was symmetrical, concave drop. Oh, here's another fun thing. I got it right here. 3/8 of an inch with a radius of 20 inches. So I think what I ended up doing here is I used my calculator for concave, which is on the Open Source Boards website, and this might be changing pretty soon. So actually, it will be changing pretty soon. So I don't have the new website up yet. I intend on making this still easy to find and get to. You enter in your skateboard width, which is 8, concave radius 20. The drop is actually 0.404 inches. So I just kind of rounded that 3/8 to 0.404. The nearest eighth I think I did there. So I'm going to enter in 0.404. Kick nose is 20, kick tail is 20. Nose and tail radius are both 4. You can see 4-inch radius there and the 20 degrees there, and this board is symmetrical. The transition length I am changing here. The transition length for my mold is going to be 3.75. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm only pressing with 2 20-ton bottle jacks and I'm pressing 3 boards at once. And I want to make sure that I can press, I'm not asking too much out of the wood. And I think these boards were originally pressed with more force, and I'd rather end up with a board with a slightly mellower transition section than a board or mold that can't really make the proper transition sections because it's just asking too much strain out of the wood. And what I mean by that is it's just trying to make the wood just bend and stretch too much. Because the transition section is where the board bends in 2 directions at once, which requires stretching and compression. Kick gap is 0.875. Again, I don't know if did I show this on here? I don't think, I do have it on here. So I have 6 5/8, and then I have a 5 3/4 section there. So if I subtract those 2 things, I should get 0.875, which is the kick gap. And then the rest of these parameters do not matter because they are for the board shape specifically. The mold's been updating automatically, and here is my male mold. The only other thing I needed to do is change the resolution, which I'm not going to do in this video, but the resolution changes the step size right here. And you want to do that because you don't want those actual steps there. Or I can do that and just do some little movie magic. But first, before that, I wanted to show you also that you can generate a female mold, which is really cool. And what I ended up doing is changing, so I'll change this resolution, 0.0625. That is the resolution I recommend for running this on a CNC machine, for getting a small enough step size where you don't really see anything. And you just click on Generate STL and then download STL, and it will save the file for you. And that's it. So pretty simple. The other cool thing, I'm just going to change this resolution so it updates faster. There's also an inverted male mold and an inverted female mold, which means that if you want to cast your own concrete molds or use some other sort of casting material, you can create the molds for your molds. So that is just another option for making skateboard molds. Now let's get into the process of making these molds and testing them. I'm showcasing some of the mold making process here, and if you want to know more details about this, check out one of my previous videos on how I make two-part wood skateboard molds. Got the dual press setup happening. So each of these are going to be pressing down on the mold at like the weakest spot on the female mold, which is right here. This is the male mold. I'm putting the male mold on the bottom because it is heavier and more awkward to move around. So I'm gonna throw all the veneers in and just slide them on in here, put the female mold on top, and then stack it all up. So I'm gonna do a little dry run of this first. I actually did that yesterday, but I just wanna get the sizing right so I know the gap here, because I want this to basically only have to travel a minimal amount because these go down very slowly because I don't have, it's all manual. So I'm gonna try and minimize this gap between this and the pieces of the mold so that the compression starts happening immediately. I'm also only going to be gluing up one board because I don't know if this is gonna work, and I haven't practiced gluing multiple boards at once, and I don't know what the process is gonna be like, so I want this to be a good board. I don't want to waste too much time trying to glue up a second board and then have a board delam on me just because I was fumbling around with something. I'm also going to put some plastic down here, and I'm going to put some shipping tape here as well. That way we make sure that we don't get glue on the mold, on the wood, because wood glue will stick to this. Although this is clear coated with a coat of polyurethane, so if there is any glue that gets on it, it should come off easily. So let's do a little test run. So I've got this plastic in between here. Having these are great for aligning the molds, but it kind of makes it so the plastic doesn't go over the edge. So I didn't really think about that when I was doing this. We'll see if this works out. It's all an experiment. Sweet. And then I have another one of these. These are just two 4x6s that I glued together and I planed so they're flat. This just adds a little bit of buffer so that I'm not digging into the mold surfaces. And I'm just checking, making sure my arbor plates are going to be sitting directly above this transition section, this thin spot on my female mold. This looks pretty good. And I've still got a little bit of a gap here. So I'm just going to take some of this solid plywood, some scrap laying around, and these arbor plates, they should be right there. Right where we need to be. And that's it. The positioning of everything in the shop is pretty far from ideal for trying to record this by myself. So what I'm gonna do is a little time lapse of the glue up, and then I'm gonna try and shift the camera around and plant it so it's facing the press. Let's take a look here. See what kind of squeeze out we're getting. Okay, that looks good. This I didn't catch earlier. This looks like it caught on here, unfortunately. I don't think that that's affecting it at all. You can see the veneer is kind of stuck. It got pinched here, so I might sand these down on round two, if there's a round two. Yeah, the squeeze out looks really solid. I don't see anything at this stage where I'm thinking this isn't going to work. One last thing I forgot to mention that's kind of interesting and helpful that I usually want to know is what is the gap like in the transition sections? And the transition sections are these sections right here where the board goes from the base of the kick to where it reaches full concave. This is a weird section of the board because it has to bend in two directions at once. So it's got to stretch and compress and do all sorts of weird things. And often on molds that are very, very tight, you might see the veneers not press up against the mold very well. You can see there's almost no gap, which is awesome. And that is using two 20-ton bottle jacks, pressing three sets of maple veneers at once. So just wanted to share that with you because that's often something I wonder, is figuring out how steep is too steep with a certain amount of force. Okay, so it has been about 20 hours and I'm ready to take the board out of the press and see if this ends up working. Looks nice and dry. I'm gonna try and release these at the same time, that way it's doesn't like want to twist at all or do anything weird. So unloading it evenly to make sure there's no weird stresses. It feels very nice. There's no like weird bubbles or anything. That's a great sign. Oh, that looks perfect. Wow. Just did this to help it cure and so help prevent it from moving. If I didn't have these clamps here, the board would probably warp as it dried out a bit. Set up the jig here for the CNC. So it's mounted, aligned, and I'm gonna download my file from SK8CAD now. All right, I just re-entered in my specs here because I saved a screenshot of them. So these were the original specs. And I'm gonna make this board 8.5 because that fits the wheels that I use and the trucks I use. 14-inch wheelbase, 6.75 nose and tail. I'm gonna mess around with these numbers a little bit more to tweak them how I like, and I'll come back when I'm done with the tweaking. Okay, I just played around with it, looked up my old specs, and here's what I've got. So 7.25 taper point, I used to make that equal to that. I'm just gonna bring it in a little bit this time. And what else did I tweak? Oh, nose and tail shape. Usually my last board that I did was a 78. This is a 74, so it's a little bit less squared off at the nose and tail. That's the goal right there. It's that shape. And I was tweaking it by basically just having that, because this little checkbox right there makes this update a lot faster, so it's easier to play around with, and then when you uncheck it, it'll show you the actual board. To get the SVG, I just scroll down and click on this SVG button, and it downloaded. There it is. Okay, so this board is a new one that I just made. And then this one is one of the original boards I designed years ago that I didn't have made in-house. And this board was made on the mold, and I don't know if you remember, but I said that at the beginning of the video, I wanted to mimic this mold, and the only thing I changed was the transition length here. I think this was either 3 or 3.5 inches, and I made it 3 3/4 of an inch. And I'm just gonna stack these on top. So this board, the old one with the blue logo, is an 8-inch board, and I think a 6.6 nose and tail. Okay, I got them lined up now, and the curves are pretty closely matched. And now I am super excited to skate it. All right, so here is the finished board, and it looks awesome. Feels really good, and I'm ready to try skating it. And if it falls apart, it means the molds were no good. If it stays together, that is a very good sign, and that means the software works. So let's see how it is. The only thing that I noticed that I'm kind of bummed about there is just the slightest little warp or twist in the board. So that's kind of a bummer, and I know it's not from the mold because I looked at the molds and there's like no warp in the mold, and when it came off the press it looked good. So it's not too much where it's going to affect the skating though. So let's see how it rides. Gotta get used to the new shape. I am very excited and stoked on how this project turned out. I wanted to address the warping issue because I think it was caused from at least one of a few things that I came up with. First, I think I may not have let it cure for long enough. I let it sit in the press for about 20 hours, I think I said, and that may not have been a long enough time. Second, I was sloppier with my glue up because I thought that it would be okay to be sloppy because the pressure would squeeze out all the glue evenly, but I realized that this may not be the case, and by being sloppier, I may have added more glue than I normally add, which may have also been a reason why I needed a longer cure time, or longer press time. And lastly, or one third thing that I thought could be contributing to the warp was my selection of the veneers. I may not have paid careful attention to the grain I was selecting because I was doing a test board for myself. And if you don't lay up the grain of the wood intentionally and inspect them, you can actually create a board that maybe is weaker or more flexible in certain spots and wants to move. So those were three thoughts. There may be other causes too of why it warped, but those were the first three things that I could come up with that seemed like the most viable reasons why it would warp. And the other good news is that I've pressed a couple boards since then, both with longer press times and a little bit carefuler glue ups, and neither of those have warped. Another thing I wanted to mention, SK8CAD is not perfect. It's pretty far from perfect, and it has its flaws. So just want to put that out there. Look out for any weird artifacts, anything that is on the mold that shouldn't be there. Sometimes weird things happen. Just look out for that. And Open Source Skateboards and I are not liable for any damages that occur from your use of this free software. Finally, if you do use SK8CAD and you like it and it is helpful for you, I have created a Patreon page specifically for SK8CAD to give you the opportunity to contribute to the development and maintenance of it. To make this tool better is going to require funding, and to create more resources for it, and to overall create a better user experience, funding is needed. So if you feel like contributing something, check out the link in the video description to the SK8CAD Patreon page. And just a side note, there is a separate open source skateboards Patreon page. This is not the same thing. I wanted to create a separate one specifically for SK8CAD because I feel that this is a very unique tool and application, and there's funding that's very specifically needed for the development and maintenance of this tool. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for any support you are able and willing to provide and enjoy skating and creating.